Good morning and Happy New Year to all of our friends at the Crest Network. My name is Bill Giannone, and I'm here this morning to talk about managing the surge, what to do when the phone won't stop ringing. As you can see, as the calendar turns to a new year, our industry prepares for the inevitability of severe weather. This is a phenomenon that we're all used to. Every time the new year comes around, we start hearing terms that we never heard before. In every part of the country, there is a huge potential for hazardous storms. Obviously, the colder the weather, the more chance we have of more severe weather in the northern regions of the country, off the coasts, inside. And these potential for our businesses could either make or break our year. Many of us start the year off and have a really good time in the first couple of months with some frozen pipes, some river flooding, and we can take the momentum and carry it through the year. Other firms, unfortunately, aren't able to manage the work that comes in, get behind the eight ball, and never recover throughout the year. So, what we want to do today is we want to talk with you about being able to properly manage the surge as it comes in a way that you can profit and capitalize on those opportunities when they come, but also not putting the rest of your year at risk. So that's what we're going to cover today. For all of us, these times will test our resources and commitment. Let's talk about some of the situations that have come up. Now, you guys might not be as old as I am. I'm in my late 50s. And when I was a kid, there was no such thing as a nor'easter. We got winter storms up in the New York area where I grew up, but we didn't call them nor'easters. We didn't know what that was. Now, this is a brand new phenomenon in the meteorological terminology, but these are things that happen every single year, and it affects a great portion of the Northeast and even into the central United States, where you're going to get a lot of these, what they call lake effect snowstorms and lake effect storms. And you have the movement of the jet stream that drops down and allowing the colder air or the Arctic air coming down from the Canadian regions to affect a lot more of the United States. Whether you're a fan or not of global warming is of no concern. I'm just pointing out the fact that when I was a kid, we had feet of snow. We have feet of snow now. And nothing has changed in that regard, except for the fact that now we're calling them nor'easters. We've come up with a real fancy name. Even on the Weather Channel now, they're starting to name their winter storms, which is something that they've only been doing for the last dozen or so years. And I happen to personally believe that it's more of a publicity stunt to get more people to watch the Weather Channel, because their viewership does go up significantly in the summertime when there is a named storm. So I think this is just a marketing ploy, because a nor'easter is no different than just any other snowstorm that the North has gotten forever. Another facet, something that did not exist 20, 30 years ago, but now is getting a lot of play, is this whole concept of a polar vortex. Many years ago, all the way down into Atlanta and Texas, there were some deep freezes that went on, resulting in a ton of business of a different variety for these companies that are not used to getting lots of frozen pipes. That's usually reserved for the companies up in the north. Well, the polar vortex was born when they realized that there are changes in the jet stream that will allow cold air to move further south. Now, once again, there's been snow in Texas for the last however many hundreds of years people can remember. It's just with the advent of the internet and the 24-hour media, we're getting a lot more attention to these things. So now we've come up with a fancy new name called polar vortex. Just something to be aware of. These things happen, obviously, during the winter months here in the United States. And it is something to understand as we start our year that these opportunities exist, and they exist for a great portion of all of us, because we can't predict when these freezes are going to occur. For those in the South, they remember back in 2014, 2015, those storms that occurred down in the Atlanta area where people were literally leaving their vehicles on the interstate and having to walk miles and miles because it got below freezing for a 48-hour period and the roads were just impassable. So these potentials are out there. We worked with companies that are members of the Crest Network over the years that had huge surges in business because of these unexpected weather events. It's very important as a company that you be prepared for those. And that's, again, what we're going to talk about this morning. Here's a picture of New York City. And yes, New York City is right on the ocean. It's part of New York Harbor, which attaches to the Atlantic Ocean. And believe it or not, the oceans do freeze through. I took this ferry route directly many, many times from New Jersey over to downtown Manhattan, New York City. And many times the ferry couldn't operate because the entire Hudson River would be frozen solid and they could not get through the frozen ice. So this does happen when there is extreme cold. As we know, it happens in Chicago. Now, this might be an extreme example of just how cold it can get in Chicago on Lake Michigan, but we do understand that these times of years. So whether you're in the Northeast or the Midwest, and whether it's snow and ice that's affecting you in your little town, or whether it's just river flooding in the areas where there's a lot of runoff downstream that are going to be coming up as we get later into the winter and in the early spring months, we all basically have a chance to get hit. There are very, very few towns in America that don't have this potential. So it's very important to understand, no matter where we are, no matter what our location, if it hasn't happened in a long time, that doesn't mean it can't happen to us now. How many times have we heard on the news about this community suffering through a 500-year storm or a 500-year flood? Let's make sure we're prepared for that. How do we get prepared for that? Well, it's very simple. Let's think triage. For those of you old enough, there was a very, very famous sitcom that was on TV back in the 70s called MASH. MASH was about a group of Army hospital attendees and workers during the Korean War. And basically, it was a comedy about their stories and their life, but almost every single episode included some treatment of some incoming wounded. And the whole concept of how you treat the wounded out in battlefields involves the concept of triage. Triage is taking each case individually, making an assessment of it, and then being able to put them in an order of importance and need. And the ones that were just superficial wounds, they would be treated very, very quickly and put on the side to be waited until those who had open wounds and that were in, very grave condition could be treated first. That's the basic concept of triage. When we're doing our work, I want you guys to think about, in a surge, to think about it the same way. Let's talk about what we need to do before we even entertain the concept of triage, because like everything else in our business, if we don't prepare properly, we put ourselves at a huge risk of not performing when the time comes. So let's talk about the things that we need to get done. We're going to talk about several different. Obviously, first of all your paperwork should be ready for multiple responses. Maybe we've got a system in place where our crew leaders or our project managers or our first responders go out and sign up projects based on having a packet. Well, let's have a lot of those packets ready. Let's make sure that they're in the truck. Don't leave them in the office and have to have your first responders constantly coming back to your office as a hub to go out to their next project. Let's understand that during surges, the calls are going to keep coming in, and we're going to need to have a process in place that allows us to be very flexible and mobile. So the more information and the more paperwork we can make sure that our responders have on their person, the better off we're going to be. So let's get all of that in their hands. And that means work authorizations, direction and payment forms, and finance options. I'm going to touch a little bit on this third little dash, the finance options. For those of you who aren't currently doing it, there are a few companies in our industry that are assisting us in collections from our clients by means of having us offer our clients financing. It comes in the form of no money down or no interest for 6 months or a year or very minimal interest payments. What we do is we hook them up with these lenders. The lenders have them fill out a very cursory application online. And if they meet certain very minimal criteria, they will qualify for a loan that would equal the approximate value of our invoice. What we then do is we make sure that the clients sign up for that financing. The day after we submit the invoice to the finance company, they then will pay us that portion of the bill and then set up the payment schedule for our client. So our client now has technically paid us in full. It's a great way of doing work, especially in a surge, and especially when we're dealing with surface water flooding. As we all know in our industry, very, very many times, a lot of these catastrophes that happen in regions due to river flooding or due to any kind of storm surge, there's not adequate coverage through the insurance policies, because many times insurance policies won't cover groundwater or any kind of infiltration like that. So for clients who won't be covered by insurance, this is a really special way to differentiate ourselves from some of our competitors, being able to offer financing. The second trick it does is it takes us out of the loop of having a huge collection effort 30, 60, 90 days from when the surge occurs. The more people that we can get to commit to do financing or to pay us cash payments for our services, the better off we'll be. And that serves two purposes. Obviously, the first one is we're not waiting for our money. And secondly, we need to understand that as with all other busy business events, there are always going to be times when the money is going to get a little tight. During surges, when we have to bring on extra people, extra help, we might have to rent vehicles, we might have to get some extra equipment. That could put a financial strain on a company, and having the ability to get some money up front as soon as we're finished with the projects certainly would ease that burden a little bit. So just understand that there are companies out there that offer financing options. If anybody is interested, please contact us at the Crest Network, and we've got a couple of names of companies that would be really suitable for your needs. Next, we're going to talk about making sure that we have all of our equipment in good working order. It's really important before we get the phone calls to make sure that we've got every single piece of equipment able to be put out and to generate revenue. Remember, our cost of carrying that equipment is a very, very steep cost compared to a lot of other companies. For instance, if you're a construction company and you're going to pave an interstate highway, you don't necessarily need to own any of that paving equipment, because you can put a bid in, win the contract for that, and then go out and either purchase or lease all of that equipment. You don't need to have that stored up. We, as restoration contractors, don't have that ability. We need to have a lot of equipment and supplies stored up waiting for that call that may come in the middle of the night when we don't have access to either equipment or consumables through the normal rental or purchase methods. So make sure all your equipment's in working order. If we can rent our air movers out for $25 to $30 a day, depending on what area of the country you're in, we certainly want to make sure we don't have 10 or 20 air movers that are broken and can't be used, because now we're talking hundreds, if not thousands of dollars a day that's not going to be collected. And with our surges, if the surge in our area is going to last for 2 weeks or so, that's many, many thousands, tens of thousands of dollars that we're potentially leaving on the table just because we did not prepare in advance. So again, it's a little overlooked fact that every piece of equipment after about 15 days pays for itself. So let's generate that revenue so that even if the equipment is getting old and a little tired, let's make sure it works. And maybe we can use that revenue that comes in to buy new equipment to replace it. But let's get those last few days and weeks out of that equipment. Let's make sure we're doing that before the surge happens. Tying in with the idea of having your equipment ready, let's make sure we have access to additional equipment and additional vehicles. We may have a fleet of a dozen trucks in our company. We don't have to ever worry about it because we've got plenty of extra vehicles lying around. But for most of us, I would think that we're running pretty lean and mean, hopefully. And that means that if we're a 2 or 3 truck operation, we've only got 2 or 3 trucks and we've got them out on the road every day. Well, in a surge, as we're going to talk about a little bit later, we might want to do our response a little bit differently. So we're going to want to make sure that we have access to additional vehicles, either through a relationship with other companies that we know. Maybe we have friends who have box trucks or some trailers lying around that we would be able to use in, the event of a surge. Or if we have relationships with commercial rental companies where we can go out to a company like a Penske or an Enterprise and rent vehicles to suit our needs. Let's just make sure we have access to them. Along with that, obviously, every once in a while, we are going to run out of equipment. That's a really good thing. We don't always want to have enough equipment to withstand even the greatest surge. If that's the case, then we probably own too much equipment already. And maybe you and I should talk about looking at our inventory of equipment and trying to make some changes to tweak it better so that we're optimizing the use of our resources. Okay, so I'll make sure we have the ability to get some extra equipment. Understand, though, that if you're in an area like if you're in around the Great Lakes and you're up in, let's just call it the Cleveland or the Erie, Pennsylvania areas, your area might get hit pretty hard. That probably will mean that all of your local resources for equipment are going to be tied up using it for their own jobs. So let's make sure that when we say we have additional access to equipment, let's make sure we have resources that are slightly outside our area that would be willing to bring the equipment to you from a couple hours away. That's a really important aspect. Once again, this is something that the Crest Network can offer all of you guys. We're very capable of putting together members from all areas of the country who might want to assist each other, and we call it a win-win. You have access to equipment, and our members have access to being able to help another member out, and all of those things add up to a really solid situation in the long run. So just keep that in mind. If you ever need any help with all of that, that's what your membership is all about. That's why you call us. Let's make sure we stock our warehouse with enough consumables. I know this always seems like an obvious point to make, but I can't tell you how many times in the middle of a surge, you'll have a whole crew that needs to go run over to a Ramsco or to Home Depot or John Donne to go pick up a whole bunch of extra equipment, a whole bunch of extra garbage bags and extra shovels. Let's make sure we've got just about everything that we think we're going to need, especially early in the year, guys. If you stock up on garbage bags and you stock up on plastic and all of your zippers early in the year, and for whatever reason your area doesn't enjoy a little surge or doesn't have any kind of regional cat, well, then you're pretty much set for the whole year, and you've got a nice stable consumables inventory to hold you through all the way, if you have to get through all the way through a year with that. But it's probably a good idea to spend that money now, get it inside your warehouse, and get everything ready so that should the call come in, you don't want to be the guy who says, well, I can't get there for 3 hours because I have to wait for Home Depot to open. Let's make sure we're the first ones out there. Okay, and finally, our very last preparation rule is going to be, let's make sure our staff knows its jobs. Okay, we're going to start talking about differentiation of responsibilities. For most of you, you probably have a crew that consists of a crew leader and a helper, or a project manager and some crew members. And my guess is that for the better part of all of your work, you're sending everybody out at the start and they're doing all aspects of the project. Well, what we're going to do is we're going to discuss a little later some different ways to handle the surge that maximizes the quality and the potential of your employees. So just keep in mind that when people are assigned their responsibilities, make sure they know that they're to do just that responsibility and not try what I call scope creep, not learn other tasks or not try to be the hero and do too many other things. We're going to need people to answer the phones, obviously. We're going to need people to go out and sign and scope the work. We're going to need people to actually do the work, and then we're going to need people to document the work, just like we do on any one normal job. But now we have to be able to multiply our efforts and handle what's going to happen if the phones don't stop ringing. That takes us to the rules. Make sure we follow these very, very set rules when we're handling a surge. Rule number 1, always answer the phone. I'm pausing for effect here, and I'm going to say it again. Rule number 1, always answer the phone. I cannot tell you how many times I've been brought in by clients of ours over the years who have told me that They just can't believe how many calls they got, and it was just getting so out of hand they had to stop answering the phone. My first question to them was, did you get $1 million job? And of course, the answer was no, we didn't. We got a lot of homes. We got a lot of $3,000 jobs. We're just buried. So my response was, if you didn't get the $1 million call, that means you're not answering the $1 million call. Always look at it that way, guys. Always look at it that the next call that comes in could be the job that makes your year. So we're always answering the phone. If it means we need to have 2 people manning the phones and making sure we're picking it up and making sure we're taking down the lead information, we must do that. Very important. Now, we have to make sure we do not overpromise and underdeliver. When there's a storm surge, every one of your competitors is dealing with what you're dealing with. So nobody is going to be getting a call and telling the homeowner, we'll be right out in a half hour. Don't worry about it. We're there. So please don't feel obligated to do that because you think that this is a good job or you don't want to lose the client. Let's make sure in every way, shape, and form, we're being realistic with the client. We need to make sure that that client understands from the very second that they speak with us that this is a highly unusual situation and that we will communicate with them, but we are going to be able to put them on a list and let them know. We should always have a fairly good understanding of how long it will take us even to respond to them. My goal is to be able to give them 6-hour windows during a surge. We should know what our capabilities are, how many of our people are going to be the responders, and be able to say, well, this guy's going to need basically 2 hours per project. So for the first 3 or 4 calls, we can have that person be told, we'll be out there in the next 6 hours. After that, if you're only working with a single responder, you can't promise less than 6 hours. You could then promise, we'll be out by the end of the day. And I know this sounds hard for guys who want to be able to hustle and make do with their business, but it's better to be realistic with people because they're going to hang up with you. And if they don't like what they hear, they're going to call the neighbor down the street. They're going to call your competitor who's next in the phone book or on Google or on Yelp, and they're going to get the same response. Or worse, they're going to be told that they'll have someone out in an hour and nobody will ever show up, and then they'll end up calling you back anyway. So be honest with them and make sure you put them on a list. But always, always answer the phone. It's very important. Rule number 2 is prioritize. This gets into what I call the triage that we talked about before. We need to prioritize based on several different aspects, but we need to be able to do things and put them into 4 boxes. Every call should fit into one of these 4 boxes. If we start on the top right is high importance and high urgency. How do we assess urgency and importance? Well, that's up to the individual companies, but the way I like to assess it is based on a couple of factors that you're able to get from the initial phone call. You want the client to accurately tell you the severity of the loss. You want the client to be able to tell you the size of their job. And what you need to be able to do is to be able to assess how quickly you can get to that job. I'm sorry, just going to go backwards. You want to arrange your response by the size of the job, the ability to get paid, and the proximity to other projects. Okay? One of the things that is very important is as soon as we get the address, and I know this sounds like it's cheating, but this is a very good strategic way of doing things. As soon as we get the address for the loss, somebody on your team should be going on to either Zillow or Google, and let's look up that address and let's take a look at the street Google view of that home. That's a good way to assess whether or not you think that this is what we in the industry call a high value client. Their ability to pay you is very important, especially in surges. Like I said before, let's assume that it's very difficult sometimes for the insurance company to guarantee coverage. So let's make sure that maybe the people who own the home have the means to pay. So if we're looking at a home that's $1 million home in a very nice neighborhood that has 3 stories of damage, that's going to be an expensive project. If it's a $150,000 home with 3 levels of damage, it's going to be the same level of expense. But what are the chances that the insurance carrier is going to have enough coverage to cover all of that, and that the homeowners might be able to cover that out of pocket? So again, I'm not trying to be demeaning to any client. Everybody needs our assistance. But as a businessman, when you're doing your triage, you definitely need to assess these things. Okay, I did mention the proximity to other projects. Obviously, if you have to drive a half hour, 40 minutes with your crews, that doesn't help you as much because they're not spinning, making money for you. So if you can get a bunch of jobs in the same neighborhood or the same subdivision, that's clearly preferable to zigzagging all around town. But let's go back to this prioritization matrix. This, believe it or not, is something that's used in all businesses. I pulled this off the internet, but it's something that when I worked on Wall Street, we used this all the time when we were trying to discuss investment opportunities for our clients. The importance is on the left side. It's on the what I'll call the vertical side. Whether it's high importance or low importance, how important is that investment to you? Well, in our case, how important is this project? It's always important to be able to assess your clients. I said on this bottom note that I just put up, always remember to give priority response to your prep clients, no matter how busy you are. For those of you who have been prep clients or who are currently elite members and are dealing with Dick Wagner and his prep program, we obviously know that our prep clients, by virtue of being clients, are given priority response. That's what the PR of prep stands for, priority response. Now, it's all well and good that we provide them with a whole bunch of services when there's no storm, but when there is a storm, they want to know that they're still going to the top of the list. So obviously, the importance level for a prep clients or for any kind of higher level clientele would be on the high side. The horizontal line shows us the urgency. How important is it to get out there right away? Again, how do we assess urgency? Some of it may be based on the extent of the damage and the severity of the damage, and some of it might be based on the quality of the client or the quality of the lead source. Okay? So we take those two matrices and we box it into 4 sections. High urgency, high importance is clearly the most important. They move to the top of our list. And remember, we're not making a list based on first in, first out. We need to understand that. We're not going to promise our clients first in, first out, because that is not the best way for your business to maximize its potential. Again, that's not fundamentally fair. And if you want to be a fundamentally fair company, then you simply make a list on a sheet of legal paper and you go, next person on the list is who you respond to. I promise you, you will not maximize your efforts. You will not maximize your revenue. Doing it this way, where we reprioritize based on every phone call, allows us the opportunity to maximize our efforts. And I know that sounds selfish, but we are in the business of making money, guys. And I would rather do 5 $50,000 losses than 25 $5,000 losses. So let's make sure we maximize our efforts. If we have something that's not as urgent but a very high importance, that would be what happens next. And so on and so on. If we have a high urgency but a very low importance, they would go after the less important people. And then there are some jobs, believe it or not, that we should not be doing. There's an old expression. I've been coaching for many years, even going back to youth sports. I was a youth sports coach for over 30 years. And there's an expression, and it is absolutely true in every walk of life and every walk of business, that 20% of the people will take up 80% of your time. We all know that. If we've coached sports, we all know that there's always a couple of kids on the team that require a lot more attention and maybe require a lot more discipline than the rest of the kids. And that's just human nature. For our industry, There are many, many times when we understand that most of our problems throughout a year come from a handful of our clients, but they just are those nuisance clients that make a 3-day job turn into 3 months. Well, the same will happen here. You're going to receive a lot of great phone calls from a lot of needy people, but you're also going to receive a lot of phone calls from people who are going to demand too much of you. They're going to expect that even though the entire area has been affected, they are the only client you're working with. Now, you can opt with that and you can deal with what I call the Jerry Maguire syndrome. If anybody remembers the movie Jerry Maguire, right after he quit his firm, he went back to his office to collect his things and was going to start making phone calls to all his clients in hopes of retaining them. Well, he got stuck on the phone with one client who was demanding all of his attention and all of his time. And by the time he secured that one client, his phone was totally bereft of any other calls and he was stuck with one client. Don't be Jerry Maguire. Don't spend so much time with any one client that you're left with one client. Let's make sure that sometimes we can tell people, I'm sorry, we're just not going to be able to get to you. We suggest you call one of our competitors. I know to some of you that sounds really horrible, but sometimes you just know on the phone. And let's make sure we prioritize as best we can. You could even decide that once you show up to a project. If you show up to a project and your PM or your first responder lets you know that this is a very small job, the homeowner could probably do it themselves, you know what? Be magnanimous. Give the homeowner a tip on what to do. Maybe even tell them to go to Home Depot and rent a fan themselves and move on to bigger and better things for your staff. Remember, we are always, always going to be in a pinch when these surges occur. So let's make sure we understand to prioritize. Rule number 3, map out your routes. Make sure you understand where your crews are at all times. And when it's time to send the next crew to the next project, don't send one crew from one side of town to the other side of town while you've got somebody sitting 2 blocks away. Prioritize their response so that your routes are properly mapped out. And this goes more importantly on days 2, 3, and 4, after the phone may have stopped ringing, but you've got equipment sitting all over the county or all over the metropolitan area. Make sure that you are taking your time to plan out the routes to maximize the number of stops your crews can make and to minimize the driving time. Yes, Xactimate pays us for driving time. But if we're wasting our time and we can only get to 4 projects as opposed to 7 or 8, we're going to need more people. And Xactimate doesn't pay you that much more that you could afford to bring on that many more people to do the work that one crew should be able to do. So always take time. And you could easily do it on Google Maps. It's really easy to set up the locations of all of your stops and look at it and just come up with some common sense order of operations for your staff. Some of you may even have software packages that are able to do that, and that's fantastic. Let's make sure we really capitalize and fine-tune that piece of our production. Rule 4. Again, rule number 1, very important. Always answer the phone. Rule number 2, prioritize. Very important. Rule number 3, make sure you map out. Very, very important as well. Rule number 4, I'm going to throw a little monkey wrench in the way that most of you guys operate, and it's going to make all the difference for you if you embrace it. We're going to say every crew has a specific task. We're going to treat our process for response during a CAT or during a surge to a production line process. Everybody's got a job to do, and that's the only job they're going to do. Remember, everybody wants action. Everybody wants to see something happening. How can we possibly do that if our crews are spending 3, 4, 5 hours at each location? We just don't have enough crews to be able to get enough work. I don't like the expression spiking the job, but in the case of emergency response during a surge or a CAT, there is value to be said for getting out there and getting the paperwork signed. So the initial visit, We need somebody or a group of people responsible for doing the initial visit. I do not want you to be going out with the initial visit and doing any work. I want your initial visit to be someone who's able to go out there, meet the client, shake hands with the client, look them in the eye, tell them that we've got them taken care of, do an assessment of the loss. If it looks like it's something that you guys want to pursue as a business decision, then have the client sign the work authorization. The language they will use is, sign with me now because we've got all our crews on the road, and once you sign, the next available crew will be out to start the work. Guys, this does two really important things. First of all, it locks them up. It commits them to you. They won't be calling other companies waiting to hear what the response time is. Once you're there and once they sign, they feel like the process has begun. The other thing it does is it allows your first responder to now go onto other calls and make those same assessments. And that client's home is signed up, but nobody's there right now. What I call this the dribble approach. We're going to dribble the work to them. So the first visit is we assign somebody who is either our PM, our first responder, or even if it's a lead technician, we're going to assign people who are capable of scoping out a job, sketching the job, and signing the job, the three major S's. The next task we're going to have is we're going to have our crew go out and just do extraction. We're going to have our best truck with our best truck mount in it, and we're going to have the crews that operate the truck mount the best, that are the quickest at it, and we're going to send them out next. They follow up. They are the first crew to arrive on the job site. They extract the water. That's all they do. They take the standing water out. Believe it or not, guys, the thing that upsets clients more than anything else is the standing water. If the first thing we do is get the standing water removed from their property, they feel 100% better. Then we move on. That crew just moves right on to the next job that's been signed. You start to see what we're doing here? We're showing up intermittently, so we're not devoting resources to any one client, but this way we're able to see a lot more clients and lock down a lot more work. So there was a gap between the first visit and the first crew. Now we send the second crew out, and the second crew, after a gap in time, when they get around to it, will go to that house that's been extracted and will now do the demolition. They will do the demolition only. So this crew will be your fastest demo guys, but also your neatest and cleanest crew members. These guys have to make sure that they can work quickly, but they can work neatly, and they can leave the house clean. So I mean doing the flood cuts, taking up all the wet materials, cutting all the drywall, but leaving it clean, making sure it's a clean slate, vacuuming, wiping down. Anything they need to do is what they need to do, to demo and clean. So it has to be a crew that can do this quickly, but it also has to be a crew that can do it efficiently. We don't want to ever compromise quality. They will then leave. There will be another gap, and then the third crew and the fourth overall representative from your company will show up, and all they will do is set equipment. They will follow behind the cleaning crew, the cleaning and demo crew, and set all of the equipment for that project. So you see what we've just done, guys? We've basically done everything that you would do on a normal job, but we've spread the responsibilities around, and doing it this way allows your company to be more responsive and to hit more homes because you're not giving all of your time and dedicated effort to any one client. If you've got the ability, what I suggest is take all of your current full-time staff members, and make them in charge of one crew. Hire temporary help or temporary labor or anybody who's looking for any kind of job like this, and put them as the second man on all of these crews, so that you have one professional from your company with one helper. You've now doubled the size of your efforts. My other suggestions: obviously your best truck with your best truck mount goes for extraction. Then your other trucks go with the demolition. Any additional vehicles that you need, they will more than likely be empty box trucks or trailers. Those would clearly be best suited for the equipment delivery. So that's the way that you would want to organize that. Many, many years ago, I was helping out a client in Atlanta who had got a massive surge due to some freezing down here. Pipes broke everywhere. They received 80 phone calls in a 24-hour period. They were able to sign up 67 jobs in a 24-hour period. Their normal workload was about 20 projects a month. So this was clearly way, way, way out of their norm of operations. Well, at the time, they had 6 crew members that were working with them. They had an owner and they had a GM. Well, the owner and the GM were the 2 guys who ended up becoming the PMs, going out and signing up the work. We had 6 crew members, so we ended up making 6 different crews. So we had 2 extraction teams, 2 demo teams, and 2 equipment setup teams. And if I tell you that within 48 hours, we were able to touch all 67 properties, that's not an exaggeration. Yes, the crews worked 18-hour days, took a short nap in between, and got back at it. So there was a massive amount of commitment that we had. But we were able to do 67 jobs and touch all of them, at least get there, get them signed, and get the work started within a 48-hour period. After 4 full days, all the jobs had equipment on them. And on the 5th day, we were able to give half the guys the day off, because all we were doing at that point was monitoring and pickups. So we had 3 guys work a 5th day doing monitoring and pickup with helpers. And then on the 6th day, when monitoring and pickup was continuing, the other 3 guys took their day off, and the 3 who had the day off previously came back and operated again as 3 separate crews. That, guys, to me, is the most optimal way to make sure that we get everything we can out of our opportunities. If you have any more questions about the crew management and you have specifics having to do with your company, please just drop me a note. Grab my email address, which is bill@thecrestnetwork.com. Drop me a quick note, and we can talk specifically about how you would want to set up your crews on this particular setup, because I give very general information. I understand, but it's something for you to think about. And then as it relates to your company, again, as a Crest member, that's what we're all about. Please, guys, don't forget, documentation is ultra important. The insurance companies won't sit there and say, well, you had a surge, so don't worry about photos and don't worry about sketches and don't worry about monitoring logs. It's really important. Though that obligation doesn't disappear, so make sure that you have staff members doing these tasks as well. Okay, really, really important. My final reminder is even more important. And I know that Dick Wagner will chuckle a little bit when I put this up, but it's really, really important. I can't tell you how many times that this becomes the long-term downfall of a short-term successful surge. Don't stop marketing. Despite your urge to use your whole staff to help with the response, do not use your marketers. Let them market. Remember, you want to be able to go back to a steady business model. If you're that company from Atlanta that's doing 20 jobs a month and you got a surge and you got 67 in 4 days, you want to be able to go back in a month to 20 jobs. Well, unfortunately, my experience and Dick's experience over the years has been that the all hands on deck mentality includes the marketers. Most owners see the urgency of today and don't understand the importance of tomorrow. They look at what the marketer's doing today as saying, well, he could really help me now. And you know what? The body, the extra body would help you now. But when we take marketers away from their efforts, unfortunately, the math says for every week that we take our marketers away from their efforts, in 6 weeks to 2 months, we will lose an entire month's momentum. I know that that sounds kind of crazy, but it's anecdotally true in about 20 instances over the years that Dick and I have experienced. So we are really, really strong and very interested in making sure that you continue your marketing efforts. You have to maintain that marketing so that your model goes back and doesn't, what I call, inversely flex. You want to go from 20 to 67 and you want to go back to 20. You don't want to collapse to 5 and sacrifice that steadiness, because once you do that, now all you've done is you've taken that advantage of the surge and you've evened out your year, and your surge only now fills in the holes for your lack of effort that you didn't put in on the marketing side, which means if it happens in January, guess what? March and April, we're going to have very quiet months. Please avoid that, guys. Please make sure we stay committed to our marketing efforts. If you want your marketers to be part of answering the phones, that's perfectly okay. There's a really good chance that their phone messages will be coming from some of their lead sources, so they'll be able to have interaction. But the second that that phone stops ringing on the very beginning of day 2, don't reassign that marketer to one of the crews or to one of the guys doing the checks or doing the documentation. Don't do that. I would rather see you go out and hire someone to do your documentation. Have the Crest Network come in and support you. It's so much more to your advantage to do that than to pull that marketer away from his or her efforts. Let's make sure we keep them in their box and they're doing what they do best. Okay. That concludes our webinar for today. If you're watching this live, I thank you for joining us this morning with the Crest Network. If you're watching this on our website, please feel free to look at some of the other videos that are on our website and reach out at any time to Dick or myself with any questions you may have. I want to thank you so much, and you guys have a great day. When the surge comes, please feel free to give us a call, and continued success.